have with me Norm Solkowski. Hey Norm, how you doing?
Pretty good, Tom. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. And what we wanted to do today is, a while back, Norm, you had presented to me a project that you had in, we'll call it north to north central California.
Mm-hmm.
And we did, I came down, visited the project, we looked at it, and now we're just getting to the point where we're going to have another discussion about assessing the project, assessing the team. But what I thought would be interesting would be for listeners to be able to sort of hear how we go through that process and maybe understand a little bit better why certain decisions are made, what really the process is. And so would you mind just sharing briefly what the project is and where you're at in the project right now? And then we'll just go right into the update that you're going to give me. Now, I haven't heard what the update is, so I thought this would be an interesting way to just kind of go with the flow and just really as though it's just you and I on a phone call. We're just letting some people listen in. So
yeah, that's great. So the project is a land development project.
Mm-hmm.
There are at present 5 cottages located next to each other at the site.
Mm-hmm.
The proposed plan would be to remove those cottages and replace them with 30 to 34 condominiums. The market analysis is really, really good for this.
Mm-hmm.
The
numbers look good.
The numbers, if we've reviewed the numbers, and the numbers definitely work. The challenge is in the permitting.
Mm-hmm.
And really dimensioning the time on that permitting. So what we decided as a strategy was that we would do this as a joint venture at least until the time that permitting took place.
Okay, and as a joint venture, maybe describe who the parties would be in a joint venture. So, just for any listeners, the difference between there's really two ways of doing a lot of deals where we do it collaboratively without banks. It would be either a joint venture, and it can be done with banks too. But in this particular case, let's say it's without banks. It would be where it's a joint venture, meaning 2 or more people team up to get a project done. And it's generally split evenly as to who does what. Not always, but let's just go based on that premise. So that would be sort of a joint venture. The other is where it might be a borrower-lender relationship. So it may be someone who's doing the project and they bring on a money partner or an investor with capital, and they structure it as a borrower-lender relationship with a loan to the project. So with that, I'll let you continue.
Okay. So we have seller has the land.
Mm-hmm.
We have a permitting time horizon that's 6 to 8 months.
And the permitting is to get the site ready. Now the site is zoned properly, if I understand correctly. Mm-hmm. But it would require permitting to do the construction of the 30 to 34 units.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, it's zoned correctly. It's just a higher density.
Mm-hmm.
The higher density, and that's the thing that we would have to get through the city. And there's a time horizon there.
Mm-hmm.
We have made efforts to give incentive to the seller.
Mm-hmm.
That he would get closer to his asking price if he was willing to work with us on the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he, in contrast, wants to just take the money and go. He wants it. He's ideally looking for an all-cash deal right now.
So he's looking for an all-cash deal right away up front, but he also, it sounds like, is basing his price on the fact that it is already approved for a 30 to 34 unit structure. And so it's kind of like having your cake and eating it too.
That would be the short answer.
Yeah, right.
And so he's seeking to, as it were, have his cake and eat it too.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying no, and
Yeah.
saying let's find some common ground.
Mm-hmm.
Let's find something in the middle.
And yeah, just maybe we'll touch on that. So a lot of times a situation like this, I know you and I have discussed this at length, actually, the idea of options or the idea of possibly a land contract. So option meaning that there's a certain price set on the purchase of the property, but
That's
it's
right.
optioned with a smaller dollar amount. Option money is paid to the seller, and that then locks it up or allows you as the buyer to have the option to purchase it in a set period of time for a set dollar amount. So you're paying a fee to be able to get that option, to buy that option.
That's right.
Yeah, and so that would be a typical way of doing it. It generally works out pretty well because if you are willing to put money down for the option, that means that you've got some skin in it. And generally speaking, that means that you would move very quickly or as quickly as possible to get that to the next stage where it's ready for permits, which I understand is where you want it to be. And so any work that you do between now, let's say when the option is exercised or is agreed to, between now and when it's actually exercised and the property is purchased, there's going to be incremental increases in value based on the work that you're doing for the seller. And so that's why options on land, options on property can be really good for both the seller and the buyer, or the person that's getting or giving the option, both parties. So sorry, I'll let you continue from there.
Well, that's exactly the theory that we've been negotiating, based on, and it's really about numbers and time now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And are you getting resistance from the seller of the option to option it, basically? It sounds like that's what you're getting pushback on.
Less pushback now than I was getting,
Mm-hmm.
but the numbers are going up as far as the price of the option,
mm-hmm.
where and we left it positive this last time, and so we'll revisit it probably next week.
Maybe just to get a little bit of context around it, roughly what dollar amounts are we talking on option money? Range.
We were talking in sort of the neighborhood of like maybe 25 to as much as 50,000
mm-hmm.
on my side of the table.
Yeah.
On his side of the table, he was at least at the start at $500,000.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty good spread.
Yeah.
and so we sort of been working together.
Yeah. Working on getting that gap a little bit narrow
that gap down, create
right.
more reality-based conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And,
have you had discussions with him or the party, with him or her or whomever it is, to look at the possibility of bringing them in as an equity partner to share in profits on the back end, so that they get a good, reasonable price up front, but they also then, if they're so confident that the project is so sweet, then maybe they're willing to wait until the property actually is completed and either refinanced or sold, where they could get some of the profit sharing. Have you had those discussions?
Yeah, I've had that discussion with him as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, in fact, we can get you a lot closer to your asking. You just have to be willing to delay gratification a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
And that will, because it's price or terms.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of, he launched it as a time value of money argument. I said, well, we're talking about a lot of time.
Yeah.
we are talking about a fair amount of money. And
well, let's just go to you mentioned the price or terms. That is a sort of a, what do you call it? Like a common quote or in the industry, and it's either price or terms, meaning that either maybe you get a really good price and there are good, well, let's say you're the seller and you get a really good price on a property, then it may mean that you've given some really good terms in order to get that really good price.
That's right.
Or on the other hand, maybe there are no terms, meaning it's just straight cash out, immediate cash, very quick cash, then the price generally is lower. So that's what you're referring to when you say it's price or terms, meaning those are the two
really on structuring some of the first set of offers were structured that way.
Mm-hmm.
That if it's an all cash deal, and if I have to take the risk on the permitting, here's the number.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't very interested, of course, in that number.
Yeah.
And then sort of a middle ground number, which said, okay, if I incent you to go through the permitting process with me, and at the conclusion, and do that through an option.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of that, I have my permits. Then you have a guaranteed price of X, which is closer.
Mm-hmm.
And then a third order option, which was, okay, if you stay with me through the permitting process,
mm-hmm.
a smaller amount of money subsequent to the permitting process, but then at the conclusion of the project,
yep,
then you get some more money still, which actually gets you to about 75, 80, almost 80% of what his original asking price was.
Mm-hmm.
So that looked pretty good too.
Yeah.
And then, everyone's different in this life. And so he kind of came back with, I like that 80% of my asking price. Why don't you just give that to me now? Thank you.
Right. Just skip part of the process, right?
You skip all the rest of it, but that 80% part.
Right. I like that piece, but I don't like the rest. So
I don't like the rest of it.
Yeah.
And then we started. Then you just start negotiating. And you just try to stay in the negotiation, try to keep staying reasonable, and try to some kind of common ground, enough to keep it going, and to see if you can, if it's possible to find that common ground to make the deal go.
Have you considered maybe bringing up to him the possibility that if he truly feels that the property is worth that much, or worth what he's aiming to get, that you would consider, and I don't know if you would consider this, but just as an idea, let's say that you give him an option payment, you start working on it, but you agree to, let's say, a reimbursement plus 10% of what you stuck into it, if he comes up with a bona fide buyer that can close at a higher price, a better price, or you have the option to meet that price that he's asking for. Because I think what he's really aiming to do, he either is just aiming for top dollar with nothing to back it, or he believes that he has the potential for getting a higher dollar value if he holds out for it. So rather than having him flip a coin and decide he wants to wait and see if there's another buyer, he may be able to have the potentially the best of whichever way works out best. So for instance, he may never come across that buyer between now and the 3-4 months, whatever time it takes for you to get to make sure that you want to exercise the option fully. It allows him to be able to find someone else if there potentially is someone out there. I
didn't even think, this is great.
Yeah, so it's one of those ways where at least you wouldn't necessarily be getting what you want in the end, ideally, but you're banking on the fact that your numbers are closer than his numbers. And you're also, if you do throw in that, let's say you spend $75,000 on it between now and that 3 or 4 month period, or when somebody else exercises it, you then would get that money back, because that's a value that you've brought to the project. So the new buyer should be interested in taking that on and understanding there's value in it. Plus you get another 10%, which is sort of a hassle fee, whatever you want to call it, and you get compensated. But in your mind, I believe you would go at it from the perspective of, you believe this is where it's at, and there more than likely won't be somebody coming in to follow up on it. So
that's a great strategy. I mean, so I'm actually going to deploy that next week.
Okay, great. And so when you're talking about the permitting, so have you found out what is the city calling that process? Is it a variance? Is it a
variance?
Does it create okay, so it is a variance, but from what you understand, I think from what you and I spoke of earlier, you're pretty sure that the city council is interested in doing it. It's just that it would require that. Is that correct? That variance. And is it a variance that requires the approval? Most of the time when there's a variance involved, neighboring properties within, a lot of times it's 300 feet, sometimes it's 200 feet, whatever that is. Let's say it's 300 feet of the property, they get notified that there is a request for a variance on this property. Then they have a chance to come into one of the planning meetings and they can voice their opinion. Number one, do you know if that is the case in this particular instance? And number two is, if it is the case, do you know, or have you done any research of what the feelings are of the neighbors in that area? Do you think it would be a potential issue, or do you think they're in support of it?
Actually, the variance is really going to be granted based on the review of plans. It's the review of plans really seems to be the linchpin on that. Although I have actually canvassed the neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And everybody seems pretty positive about it.
Okay.
Because the community is looking to make some changes. Okay.
Yeah. So what I call it discretionary or non-discretionary decisions by the council. So a discretionary approval, let's call it, would mean that there is input from neighbors in this case, and they would take into account what the neighbors feel about it. So that it'd be interesting to know for sure if this is a discretionary or non-discretionary decision. By non-discretionary, it means that if it follows all the guidelines of what the city has for ordinances, for the city guidelines for construction or for development, then it needs to be approved. I mean, it followed all of the guidelines, and therefore it would be approved. So that would be considered a non-discretionary. Ideally, if you could find out from the city, I mean, ideally it would be great to have a non-discretionary decision, because then all you have to do is make sure it fits all the boxes for the development. So that would be one thing that I would jump on fairly quickly, just to find that out. But even though, let's say it's let's say it is discretionary, where other outside people could have, or things could have an influence on it, it doesn't mean that it's not a good idea to continue down that path. It would just mean to do things like you've done, where you've gone to the neighbors within that many feet of the property, of the edge of that property, and you've gotten a feel for where they're at. And a lot of times you'll find in neighborhoods, especially in residential neighborhoods, and this has some multifamily, some residential around it, but let's say that it's all residential. A lot of times there's going to be one or two neighbors that really are sort of the spokespeople, or the people that they have a bit more influence. It's a good idea to find that person so that they can help if you can get them on board with the idea that what you have is a good plan, it's better for the community, all of that, then you can get someone to kind of work along with you that is able to share with the other people in the community what it really, what the advantages of having something like your offering would have. So just, and you may have already gone through all of that, but that's a process that I always would do when I was doing a lot of developing.
Yeah, I've got
And
people that are leads in that immediate vicinity
mhm.
that I've identified. So
Yeah,
yeah, they're definitely on board,
great.
ready to go forward.
Yeah, good. And so do you know how many meetings are going to be required between, let's say that you and the seller came to terms on what the sale would look like, whether it's an option or cash out, whatever that is. Have you checked with the municipality?
Bi-monthly right now,
Okay.
every other month.
And so do you know from start to finish based on that? Have they given you the order of which the meetings, because I'm assuming they have a planning board.
Oh, I
And
see. Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. So the process is it has to go through. You've got city council, you got a planning board.
mm-hmm,
As far as I know, it's non-discretionary.
mm-hmm.
If you make it through those hurdles, then they just simply approve it.
Okay. Yeah. So those are a couple of things that I would probably try and hone in on a little bit more. And then from there, yeah, it's like where you're at right now. It's a matter of negotiating the terms ideally, because if it truly is a lucrative project, I mean, to me, it would make a lot of sense to share a reasonable chunk of the profits in the back end, because that way, if it's a percentage of the profits that person gets, it really is reducing everyone's risk in it. It's reducing your risk, especially because it may be reducing the upside, but I'd much rather have a reduced upside with a reduced downside.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so that, and by not overpaying for a property when we're buying it because we think the upside is going to be great, we can keep the acquisition costs of the undeveloped property, or underdeveloped in this case, down low enough so that if something were to happen, then you're not paying too much for it. If it goes really well, yeah, you'd be sharing a lot of the profits with the seller. But again, better to go from the abundance mindset. There's plenty there for everybody. Let's get the project done and make sure everybody does well. It really helps make a project go smooth. So
Yeah, and it's good to have that cushion against
mhm,
disaster. You
mhm.
know?
Yeah, right. And so what do you think are the next steps? Or did you have any thoughts or questions on that particular project?
No, because on that project, really, it's we're at that negotiating phase. But this is a whole new strategy for me to sort of raise when I go back to it next week.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll do that, and we'll see where this goes.
Yeah.
Because it's just a different way to look at it that I hadn't considered yet.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay, great.
that was the big deal. Is just the update was really around being in negotiation,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes with that.
And just you had a general contractor that you were vetting, and from what we talked about, you liked what you had found so far. Any updates on him? Him and his team? Would he be ready to roll to help you with
Yeah,
this process?
we're ready to go when we've got a deal.
Mm-hmm. And when we were out there, one of the things we talked about, you mentioned them as cottages, and really they are small single family homes, like 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and they're just one level. So we talked about the idea of maybe lifting them,
Yeah.
moving them to to other lots. So ideally as infill lots within an established community, because then the home would fit right in as though it had been there for the 50 some years, or however many years they've been. They look to me like they're probably in that range of about 50 years old, would you say?
That's right. And
Mm-hmm.
and of the 5, 3 out of 5 could be moved.
Mm-hmm.
We've identified 2 lots in another community
Mm-hmm.
to mention the costs to moving them.
Mm-hmm.
And my builder additionally says that, because there are potential for slabs there for additional, he could build other houses that look essentially like these cottages,
Mm-hmm.
and sell those as well.
Yeah, good.
So it's
good.
like a sub deal within the deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I liked about these homes was the fact that they're simple, they're not tall. I had mentioned to you that back in Minnesota, I had moved probably close to a dozen homes, and some of them were a story and a half. Some of them had bump outs on them. Some of them had garages on them where you end up pulling that off to the side. But really what you're looking for when you're moving a home is something that's low profile, because the cost of either raising power lines or dropping power lines, or even the width of the home, that can be extremely expensive.
Mm-hmm.
There are permits required for when the home is being moved. It has to be moved, at least in the cases where I did it. It would generally be everything is ready to go, and exactly at 1 p.m. that's when the house movers can move. And you go about walking pace, maybe a little bit faster if it's out in the country, but in the city, I remember walking behind the homes as they were being moved from one area to another. And that's about how fast they actually move. And so the simpler the home is, the more compact it is, the better off one is. And these, especially the 3 of them, look like they'd be really like almost a piece of cake to move. It can be expensive, but it can definitely be worthwhile. The other 2 had, I think, if I remember right, at least one of them was an L shape.
Yeah.
And so, and they may both have been, but and it's not even for sure that those couldn't be moved. It just becomes quite a bit more expensive because the L shape would have to be split, and then it's a matter of splitting it. You move two parts of the home at one time, and then you have to build it back together. So it just becomes a bit more of a hassle. So, but it'll be interesting to see if this deal comes together. We'll be able to get some good footage of a house rolling down the highway, so to speak. So, but yeah, that'll be cool to see that happen. Anything else you wanted to share on this one, or is that should we connect again in the next couple? Pardon me?
That's pretty much where I am on this deal right now.
Okay, so why don't we'll connect again in the next couple of weeks here. When you have something, just let me know, and we'll keep our listeners and viewers up to speed on how things progress.
Absolutely.
So, and just if anybody wants to reach out to you, if they have specific questions about this or anything, is there a phone number or something that they?
Oh yeah, give me a call at area code 510-703-7721, or send me an email at Hannah Buys Houses. That's HANA Buys BUYS Houses at gmail.com.
Great. Well, that sounds good. And thank you, Norm. If any of the listeners, if any of you have any questions, any comments, anything you'd like to share, anything, really would love to have feedback one way or another. Any topics that you'd like to cover, definitely want to hear from you. If you just reach us at feedback@tombraegelmann.com. Again, feedback@tombraegelmann.com, and that's BRAEGELMANN. So looking forward to hearing how things are going, Norm, and we'll catch you next time.